If you told someone that you liked LEGO, they might assume that you go about it in one of two ways. Either you're someone who just sees sets that you want, buys them, builds them as LEGO intended, and just, that's enough for you. You just keep them that way. Or you're someone who's a little bit more creatively inclined, maybe you're a bit of a mockist, and you just use your own parts to build whatever the fuck you want. And that's where the fun in LEGO comes from for you. Now obviously it doesn't have to be as cut and dry as that, like anyone can be a little bit of both. Maybe you're someone who primarily makes their own creations, but you have a few specific official sets that you really like. Maybe you keep your sets built for a little bit, and then you scrap them for pieces down the line. I mean, when I was a kid, I had every single Bionicle from 2009, and then once I had them built for like a week, I was like, fuck it, I'm bored now. Let's make some silly shit. However, for the longest time, LEGO has offered sort of an official middle ground between just making the thing on the front of the box and doing whatever the fuck you want. Those being official alternate and combo models. Now, alternate models are a really simple idea, and they've been around forever. LEGO used to push this shit all the time back in the day. Basically, you're just taking the pieces that come with a set, and instead of making the thing on the front of the box, you're making something that's typically on the back of the box. Just another thing to do with the pieces that specifically are included in that set. Basically, a lot of official alternate models were like a more low-key version of those LEGO Creator 3-in-1 sets. Like obviously there's the one main model that gets primary focus, but they typically wouldn't tell you about the alternate models on the front of the box like the Creator sets do. LEGO would be like, hey kid, you like this set? Check out the back of the box. You won't fucking believe what we got up to. Now, there are some really cool alternate models out there for sure. Some of my personal favourites would be from the first year of Bionicle, where you had these Rahi sets which contained two near identical creatures that you were supposed to make fight, but you could combine the pieces from both creatures to make one bigger creature. LEGO really had all the friendless kids from 2001 in mind when they did that. Much appreciated. However, what I mostly want to talk about today are combo models, specifically one, but we'll get there. Combo models are similar to alternate models, but rather than just using the pieces within one set to make something else, you're combining pieces from two or more sets to create one specific thing. And that's pretty fucking cool. Now, conceptually, I absolutely adore combination models. I think they're really fucking fun. I think a big part of why is because I love that self-imposed challenge of, having to make the most out of the pieces you have available to you, similar to an alternate model. But with a combination model, because you're using two or more sets, you tend to have a little bit more to work with, and there's more variety in the parts that you have available to you. So you can make some really cool and interesting stuff. Obviously, there are some amazing official combination models out there, one of which is, like, the main focus of this video, but sometimes I'll just, take two little dudes that I made, take them apart when I'm bored of them, and make a combination model out of my own models. I don't know, it's something I would really recommend trying. It's really fun. They look crusty as hell, but I found some pictures from like 2 years ago where I took these two goofy little dudes that I made, smushed them together, and made a fucking dinosaur exclusively out of the parts from those two dudes. And I don't know, I remember being really proud of that. It was a lot of fun. Another really nice thing about official alternate and combo models is that they can do a lot to sort of add to the world of discontinued themes. Like, just as an example, Rock Raiders is a classic theme with a very dedicated fanbase, and there's a lot to love about it. However, it didn't actually receive that many sets. Not counting the promotional Kabaya ones, only 8 sets were released for the theme, so if you've got a full collection, things still might feel a little bit lonely. However, the official alternate models do a lot to remedy this, because you can use them to bulk up your collection, and I would imagine that's a pretty cool feeling. Bionicle also had a really cool approach to this in my opinion. A lot of official alternate and combo models are not only canon, like for example there's a lot of Rahi that just kind of exist to inhabit the world and fill it out a bit more, but a lot of prominent characters within the story exist as official combination models, such as Boltar or the Shadowed One. It's an approach I'm really fond of that gives people the option to just extend their collection a little bit more if they're willing to go the extra mile. Now believe me, I would love nothing more than to sit here and go on and on for a couple hours about the history of combination models, but unfortunately it's a little bit tricky to talk about. I've no idea when the first official combination models came to be. Like, I know LEGO did encourage the combining of different LEGO space themes in the early 90s, I think, but the oldest official combination models that I'm familiar with come from the Slicers line, and that's as recent as 1999. By combining either the 4 good or evil Slicers, you could create Robotops and Ultra Rex respectively, and while they are pretty fucking goofy by today's standards, they're pretty ambitious for what they are. Or you could be a real one and instead combine 4 Slicers to create the absolute unit that is Hiker Mike. You might be put off by the fact that he combines 4 Slicers yet is only slightly bigger than one, but you just wouldn't get it. And you should know better than to question Hiker Mike. Another thing that makes combination models a little tricky to talk about is that the means that they were promoted and I guess distributed are all over the place. You could really tell when LEGO gave a shit about a combination model. A few from Bionicle, for example, got their own retail releases, like Takuta Nuva, Voparok, and arguably most notably, the Card-as Dragon. Some combination models even had the instructions required to build them included in the instruction manuals of the official retail sets that they were comprised of, which was really handy. Others unfortunately weren't so lucky. The instructions for some combination models were either locked to the LEGO website, stuck in magazines like the LEGO Club magazine or the Brickmaster magazine, and some just like either have their instructions lost to time or never fucking released in the first place. I think one of the most notable examples of LEGO just not sharing instructions for a combo model would be the 2016 Makuta from Bionicle G2. This is one of the absolute most impressive combination models to ever exist, and we just got a couple pictures of like the skeleton and stuff. That's kind of all we got. Never got any official instructions. Also, not too long ago, LEGO did this thing where they just like released some of the most beautiful fucking combination models I've ever seen in my fucking life. And they were just like, yep, these sure are combination models. Hope you didn't want instructions. Thanks for that. On top of the promotion and distribution being a bit all over the place, unfortunately, the quality is also a little bit messy with a lot of official combination models. So before we really get to the topic of this video, let's just look at a couple of stinkers real quick. So there's a few combination models that aren't really bad models on their own, but they're not really trying that hard to be a combination model, if that makes sense. For example, this is the Dickapi. It's a bird-like Rahi from the first year of Bionicle, and it combines Pohatu and Anawa. The issue is that it uses a good chunk of Pohatu's parts and just Anawa's feet, and nothing else. Literally just 2 parts.
Give me your shoes.
So while it's decent in its own right, it's not really a great combination of 2 sets. Another example of this, again from Bionicle, would be the Lorak. The Lorak on its own is a pretty decent looking flying creature, but the issue is it's pretty small and is comprised of only 70 pieces, but those pieces come from 2 Titan sets. You need to take apart 2 large sets to make this thing, and then once you've taken them apart, you're only using 20% of the available parts. So like, yeah, it's fine, but it didn't have to try too hard to be fine. Some combo models just suffer from being a little bit fucking cheeky, in that they sometimes use illegal builds that aren't illegal but still really fucking grind my gears. I hate this shit. And some are just straight up impossible. I'll touch on it later, but one of the Power Miners alternate builds is genuinely impossible with the available parts, and there's a Rock Raiders alternate model for the Rapid Rider that uses these 1x3 slope pieces that the Rapid Rider doesn't fucking come with. It comes with these 1x2 ones, and they don't quite work as well, which is a shame because the alternate model actually looks pretty good. There's also a few instances where instead of not going far enough with a combination model, the LEGO group arguably went a little bit too far, and made a combination model out of sets that really didn't warrant having a combination model. One of the most notorious examples of this would be Gardas, who combines all 6 of the 2010 Bionicle stars to make a complete eldritch abomination of a figure. And like, man, yeah, this is completely all over the place. What a fucking send-off for Generation 1 of Bionicle. Although I will say, as much of a disaster as he is, I kind of appreciate the fact that he exists. Like, you didn't have to do something like this. And I feel like going into making something like this, you kind of know it's going to be bad, but fuck it, someone tried. Someone tried. There's also a handful of combination models that are just downright terrible. I know I've already brought up Bionicle a lot, but I couldn't not bring this one up. This is the Minutri, and despite the fact that it combines parts from 4 individual very solid sets, it could barely fucking combine the individual sections of its torso together. This thing is an unbridled disaster. It's barely holding itself together, has several illegal builds, and most importantly, looks stupid as fuck. This is apparently supposed to be like a flightless bird. I don't see it, and honestly, I don't want to. Moving on from Bionicle, LEGO also dabbled in combination models with a lot of their other construction themes, and the results were very interesting. Some of you might remember these DC figures from 2012, and I'm sorry if you do, because they're not very fondly remembered, and some of them are downright terrible, like this fucking lime green, no leg day looking ass Hulk. But this theme does feature a few combination models. Most of them just combine 2 sets, and those are harmless enough. But there's one that combines 3. By combining Joker, Batman, and Green Lantern, you get Lantern, who is one of the most bizarre fucking things I've ever seen in my entire life. Despite combining 3 sets that very much have knees, this guy has no knees for some reason. He's also got a bunch of doohickeys coming out his back, and someone at LEGO must have been down horrendous, because for some reason his leg armor is comprised of fucking torsos, which makes him ludicrously dummy thick, like dangerously. And lastly, one more before we get onto the main topic. My personal favorite, just completely fucking bizarre combo model comes from Hero Factory. Now, most of the Hero Factory combination models are totally fine, they're just harmless for the most part. The ones from the 4th year are a bit strange, but the ones from the 2nd and 3rd years of Hero Factory are totally normal. They just combine Hero and other Hero to make Big Hero. However, the 1st year of Hero Factory combines 3 figures to create the absolutely fucking bizarre Lucas Valor. And the funniest thing about Lucas Valor, other than his just absolutely fucking bizarre design, is the fact that not only is he canon, but he's supposedly just a regular ass hero. If this was like a weird security robot or something, I'd be like, yeah, fair enough. But no, this guy is supposedly the leader of his own hero team, the Delta team. So like, canonically in Hero Factory, there's just one team of heroes out there who is led by a guy who's about twice their size and has a fucking torso for a face. Which is just amazing to think about. However, fuck all of that. We gotta talk about Power Miners. So I've mentioned a couple times that I fucking love Power Miners. I mean, you could probably tell from, you know, all of that, just about. But Power Miners had a very, very interesting relationship with alternate and combo models. For a system theme in the late 2000s, Power Miners put a weirdly big focus on its combination models, until it didn't. See, in the first wave of Power Miners, there were 3 combination models, and they were pushed pretty heavily. They got promotional videos, they were in the instruction manuals for all the sets. However, in the second wave, there were just 3 alternate models that didn't get nearly as much promotion. You had to use a code from a LEGO Club magazine to unlock them on LEGO's website. And then, in the third and final wave of Power Miners, there was nothing. No alternate models, no combo models. The only combo here was selling like shit into getting Power Miners cancelled. Thanks for that. So the main thing I want to talk about are the Wave 1 combo models, because they're the ones most people are familiar with, and also one of them in particular is really, really fucking good, but we'll get there. First things first, I want to quickly touch on the Wave 2 alternate models, because they're not as well known, and also I won't have as much to say about them because I don't actually own any of them. So first up is the Rubble Rescue Rover. This is an alternate build for the underground mining station, and honestly, I don't have a ton to say about it. The underground mining station is the only Power Miners set that not only do I not own, but I've never owned. Getting your hands on this, even back in the day, was a massive pain in the ass, and it's very expensive secondhand. So it's not really a set I'm interested in getting, let alone using the pieces from it to make this fucking thing. The Rubble Rescue Rover looks pretty fine, I think. It's just kind of a dinky little car with a searchlight on the back and a bucket on the front. It looks perfectly fine for what it is, but unfortunately, it's not really making the most out of the available pieces. The underground mining station has over 600 pieces, and this doesn't even use half of that, which is a little bit unfortunate. But still, what's here seems perfectly fine. Now, while I don't have a ton to say about the model itself, the Rubble Rescue Rover does feature a few oddities. For example, in this render from a LEGO Club magazine, which is where the model originated from, you'll notice this guy. Yeah, the original set doesn't come with him. It comes with Geolix, which is the large trans-neon green rock monster. Yeah, this red guy is nowhere to be seen. So, you could argue that's false advertising, I don't know. However, where things get a little bit more false is the fact that this model is technically impossible to make with the available parts. It's asking for 2 of this 1x4 stickered element, and the original set comes with 1. So it's kind of fucking lying to you. You hate to see it. The remaining 2 alternate models from the second wave of Power Miners are both alternate models of the same set, the Titanium Command Rig, which, unlike the underground mining station, I actually own, so I could hypothetically make them, but like, this shit's kind of big and like really good. I don't want to take this shit apart, I'm sorry. The first of these is the Rock Watchman or Rock Striker. And while I've never built it myself, at a glance I'm not really impressed. The instructions were only ever released in Germany, and while it looks fine and it has a pretty interesting shape, the cab and the crane are pretty much just copy-pasted from the Titanium Command Rig. So like, it's an alternate model of a set that is kind of just a smaller version of that set with less going on, so I don't know, I'm not really feeling this one. The other alternate model is the Blast Roller, the instructions for which were released in a Brickmaster magazine. This one is at least a lot more unique, and having something like this makes a lot of sense for Power Miners. It fits in with the theme quite well. It's kinda lacking in functionality, it doesn't have a ton going on, but it's at least a lot more unique than the Rock Watchman, so I think I prefer this one, at a glance anyways. Moving on to the first wave of Power Miners, we've got one more thing to talk about before we touch on the combo models. Or the one combo model that I actually really wanted to talk about. There's a lot of ground to cover in this, I'm sorry. Alongside the 3 combination models, the first wave of Power Miners also features one alternate model. It's an alternate model for the granite grinder called the Cargo Crusher, and its instructions were only ever released in New Zealand. Now, unlike the Wave 2 alternate models, I have built this myself and I have experience with it, which is good because it's allowed me to confirm that this thing is complete dog shit. The Cargo Crusher fucking sucks. Before I made it, I was actually quite looking forward to it because I was like, oh, it's just like an alternate version of the granite grinder, this'll be fun. But once you have it in your hands, you really start to realize that this shit's just bad. Compared to the granite grinder, it feels pretty bare bones. Out of the granite grinder's 99 pieces, this only uses 68, which isn't that bad, but man, it really could have used some of those leftover pieces, because this just feels boring. The function of this piece on the front spinning rather than going back and forth works just fine, but I'm not a fan of how it's constructed. To make the function work, there's a 7-long axle running through the bottom of the vehicle with a gear on the end. But unfortunately, they're trying to make the most out of what they had here, because this axle isn't quite long enough. It really needed to be 7.5 long, which I know doesn't exist, but it don't feel right. To get the function to work properly, you kinda need to not push this bushing all the way in, and then not push this gear all the way in, and it just feels kind of flimsy. And speaking of flimsy, while these headlights on top of the roll cage look cool, they don't feel quite right. I'm pretty sure that this is an illegal build. What they've done here at the front is also really annoying. I hate how they've attached these 1x2 plates to these like vent pieces. It's just, again, really flimsy, doesn't look good. I kinda hate it. Unfortunately, the Cargo Crusher really sucks, and I wouldn't recommend getting a second Granite Grinder just to make it. What I would recommend you do though, is get a second Granite Grinder and make this alternate version of the Cargo Crusher that I found on Reddit. This is badass, and I would highly recommend making it. This version of the Cargo Crusher uses nearly all of the available pieces, looks way better than the original, and honestly, at least in my opinion, does a few things better than the original Granite Grinder. One little thing that I can appreciate right off the bat is that there's a place to store the dynamite. The original Granite Grinder doesn't really have this, you just kind of chuck it in the bucket and call it a day. I also love the shape of this alternate version of the Cargo Crusher. It's really nice. I like how the cab specifically is not dead center. It's just a really interesting and fun design that I would highly recommend making. Unfortunately, it does still have the issue of that 7-long axle just not being quite long enough, so if you're making this for yourself, do yourself a favor and get an 8-long one. It'll work out way better in the end. So finally, moving on to the combination models, we're still not at that really good one. Because, of course, there are 3 combination models from the first wave of Power Miners, and while one of them is amazing in my opinion, the other 2 aren't doing so hot. So let's get them out the way first. By combining the Stone Chopper and the Mine Mech, you get the Cave Cutter, which is just an absolute contraption. It's strange, really. Like, I kind of like it, but it's a bit fucking out there for sure. For a start, unlike most of the Power Miners vehicles, this one doesn't really have any functionality. Nothing happens when you push it along, there's nothing like you twist a gear and a thing happens. It's just a thing. You could maybe count the articulation as a function, but And speaking of rolling it along, you kind of can't do that because it's got one wheel. It's weird, like the front half of the vehicle looks like it's just crawling along, but then it's got one wheel in the back. It just feels really weird to move. And funnily enough, it looks like the guy who designed this model didn't even know how it was supposed to move around. Because if you look at this video from the official Power Miners website, where the designers talked about the sets and such, your man's got it like this, which is just bizarre. It's also missing all the stickers, and these 2 clip pieces are white instead of black like they are in the final model. This is a weird fucking video. I don't know what was going on here. This was definitely made in like 2 minutes, I guarantee you. Outside of just looking weird, my 2 biggest gripes with the Cave Cutter are how flimsy it is, and the cockpit. When I say flimsy, I just mean that the back section of the vehicle isn't very strongly attached to the rest of it. You push down on it and it will just snap in 2, which is a real shame, but you can pretty easily fix it with a handful of your own parts. However, what I have more of an issue with is the cockpit. In the official render, the driver is sitting down in the cockpit. But if you look at the final model, there's only 2 studs here. So if you sit him down, he just looks really fucking stupid. So naturally you want to stand him up in the cockpit, but then you give him chronic back pain, because he has to lean really far back to grab the handlebars properly. It just kind of looks terrible. What really bugs me about this is the fact that while this set doesn't leave a lot of pieces left over, you can very easily use those pieces to construct a seat for the driver. This looks infinitely better in my opinion, and it's just done with pieces left over from the Stone Chopper and Mine Mech that go unused in this model's construction. I've no idea why they didn't figure this out themselves. This is just a massive improvement to the set in my opinion. Also, one last thing that's not really a big deal, but just felt like adding salt in the wound. If you look at the instructions for this model, you'll notice that at the very end, they make the red rock monster hold the green crystal. That's fucked up. Don't you ever fucking do that again. So this thing isn't great, but I won't lie, there are some things I quite like about it, and it's grown on me a lot over time. While the vehicle doesn't roll very well, and it doesn't really have any functionality, I will say, I like how it looks. I think it looks just fine. It's got a very interesting silhouette, and it stands out nicely compared to other Power Miners sets. There's also some little things that I really enjoy. I really like how these smokestacks are done, and I love how they've attached the dynamite here. I don't know, it's a little thing, but I really enjoy that. The Cave Cutter isn't great, but considering it's combining the 2 smallest Power Miners sets from the first wave, I don't know, it's worth making, I'd say. Getting a second Stone Chopper and a second Mine Mech to make this might actually be worthwhile in my opinion. It's nothing special, but it's fine. And of course, while there's a lot wrong with the vanilla model, I do think that a few small changes go a long way. So if you're willing to make some modifications, I think you might get something out of this. By combining the Granite Grinder and the Thunder Driller, you can make the Aero Shredder. And you might notice that my Aero Shredder looks a little bit different to the official one. And that's because, unlike the other two combination models from the first wave of Power Miners, I didn't actually get a second Granite Grinder and a second Thunder Driller specifically to make this. And while it does mean that what I've got right here in my hands is not totally accurate to the real model, I think that was the right move. Because this shit sucks, and is not worth getting a second Granite Grinder or a second Thunder Driller for. The Aero Shredder is basically the infinitely less successful cousin of the Tunnel Transport from Rock Raiders, who also lost all his money in NFTs. It's just kind of a mess, and it does have some functionality, but it's not the best functionality in the world. One nice thing about this model is that it's actually two models, so you're putting in two sets to effectively get two sets, and that's kind of neat, I guess. We'll start off with the jet, and yeah, that's kind of the first issue here. This is a fucking jet plane that you're supposedly supposed to fly in a cave, which is conceptually a bit wacky, but, you know, that's gonna... Some people aren't going to mind that, some people are going to mind it, it is what it is. The jet is overall pretty flimsy, and I'm not a massive fan of it. I really like what they've done with the cockpit, I love the use of the bucket, but other than that, I'm not really feeling it. There's a lot of really flimsy connections, and there's some weird gaps that unfortunately aren't conveyed here in my model, because I just couldn't fucking stand looking at them, so I fixed them. But yeah. There's also, like, not really anything to this. Like, it doesn't roll along on the floor, there's nothing that happens when you twist a gear or whatever. It's just kind of a hunk of plastic, and it's not a great looking one at that. The other model included here is this weird kind of steamroller thing, and it's just kind of really janky. This roller part looks cool, but unfortunately it's a little bit higher than the treads, so if you're just rolling it along, it won't make contact with the ground unless you're like rolling it on carpet, so it just kind of sits there looking goofy. The cockpit also looks really fucking janky because they tried to give the driver like a steering wheel, which is a fun idea, but unfortunately the cab just lands on top of the steering wheel. I've actually kind of fixed it a tiny bit, it's actually worse in the official model, which is just, alright, sure, whatever, you're doing the best with what you have, I guess. Lastly, on the side here, you've got this absolute doohickey of a thing, which is kind of the only function this model has. You can put dynamite in this crate here, pull back on this lever, let go, and it'll launch thanks to this rubber band. It works just fine, but it's pretty dang ugly, and I don't know, you kinda wish the set did a little more than that, especially since it's combining two models which have really good consistent functions. Arguably the main feature of this build is the fact that there are these chains underneath the jet that you can hook over this piece here and carry around the lower model with. Now, this is definitely an idea. I'm not completely willing to say it's a good idea, because I'm not completely on board with it. It's a bit janky. It kind of feels like you're stressing the chains a bit. I don't know. It definitely works. It looks dumb as shit. And I'm not really feeling how it works in practice, but I don't know. It's definitely a thing you can do. Now, the Aero Shredder is a bit weird on its own, but there's a bit more to it than that. There's also a lot of oddities going on with the promotional material for some reason. For a start, while I couldn't find any video of the designer talking about the model like with the other two combination models, it's the only one of the three combination models to appear in an official Power Miners animation. There was this weird thing on the Power Miners website where you could choose one of three vehicles to go and like fight rock monsters and stuff, and then a fun little animation would play. And for the Thunder Driller, it showed it combining with the Granite Grinder to make the Aero Shredder. And it's the only combination model shown off in this fashion, which is kind of weird. Bit of a weird pick. Also, before we move on, I just want to quickly point out how fucked up the render for this model is. Okay, so for a start, the catapult, which is meant to launch dynamite, has a crystal in it, which is just kind of weird. It gives off the vibe that whoever did this render didn't realize this was a catapult and just saw this and was like, oh, that's a place to store crystals, sure.
What do we do?
Here, use this!
And you might also notice these grey bricks here, which I would imagine when this set was being photographed were used to hold the jet up in the air, and someone just forgot to crop it out. So, yeah. But finally, we gotta go out on a good note. And let me tell you, there is no better note out there than what is, in my opinion, LEGO's coolest combination model. And that is the Crystal Crawler. By combining the Claw Digger and the Crystal Sweeper, you can make the Crystal Crawler. And let me fucking tell you, you should, because it's a good ass model. When you make a combination model, you can often feel that it's a combination model, and you might come out of the experience feeling that it's just, you know, pretty cool, but not as good as either of the sets that went into it. And that kind of makes sense in a way. Like, those were specifically designed to be those sets, and the combination model is just an afterthought. But with the Crystal Crawler, this feels like an official set. Like, you look at it, and nothing sticks out as unfinished or kind of jank. It's just kind of brilliant. In my opinion, the Crystal Crawler doesn't, like, stand out in a bad way when held up against the official Power Miners sets. In fact, if anything, I think it complements them really well. It's just a great looking model that sticks out in a good way because it's just very unique compared to the other Power Miners sets. Like, the combination of these large heavy duty wheels and the treads is completely unique to the Crystal Crawler, and you know what? It looks fucking brilliant. Also, this is kind of a little thing, but another thing I really enjoy about the Crystal Crawler is that it serves a unique purpose among the Power Miners lineup. Like, this is the closest thing the Power Miners have to, like, a loader or a transporter, if that makes sense. None of the official retail sets really served this purpose. Like, the Granite Grinder had a bucket on the back, but it just kind of dragged it along. And the Crystal Sweeper had a big old bucket on the back, but obviously that's kind of different. The only things that really kind of stick out and are a bit of a giveaway that this is a combination model are the stickers. There's a few stickers that are just in weird places, but I don't think it's really fair to hold that against the model. Like, that's just how stickers are, and if you try removing them, you can get this really yucky stain left on your parts, so I don't think it's worth it, and I won't hold it against the set. Other than that, it just looks brilliant. Everything seems so well thought out. It's like everything perfectly fell into place. I adore this design with the two cockpits next to each other. It looks brilliant. The engines look really good. The way the bucket is positioned looks perfectly natural. Even the back of the vehicle, which is really simple, looks brilliant. And obviously, the front of the vehicle is just iconic. The way this arm reaches over this curved front of the vehicle, and how these pincers, like, surround the bucket, it just looks fantastic. This really doesn't look like a combination model, and while you're building it, you forget it's a combination model. I remember when I built this on stream, I'd be like, why am I building up the base of the vehicle using these hinge pieces, and these 1x2 trans red pieces? That's kinda weird, I wonder why they use that. Oh wait, yeah, it's because they're just making phenomenal use of the parts they had available to them. Good shit. Another area where the Crystal Crawler really shines is in functionality. Now, the Cave Cutter and the Aero Shredder kinda dropped the ball here. The Cave Cutter just does not have any functionality, and while the Aero Shredder has some, it's kinda fucked up and janky. The Crystal Crawler doesn't have a function in the traditional sense, like nothing happens when you roll the vehicle along or twist a gear or whatever, but it's got this really interesting mechanism where, like, you scoop crystals up with the bucket at the front, this arm reaches over to the back, dumps them in the bucket, and then this bucket, like, folds out. So, like, hypothetically, the miners could get at the crystals once the vehicle has stopped or whatever. It's just really fun to mess around with, and while it's not a traditional function per se, I still really enjoy it. And to be fair, while it's not like a technically impressive function, it is combining two sets that, in my opinion, have a fairly underwhelming function, and a function that is really cool, but a little bit inconsistent in how it works. So, you know, it's alright, it's doing its best. Also, this isn't really a function per se, but one small thing I really like about this vehicle is the tool storage. The way that they've stored, like, tools for the miners behind the treads here is just brilliant. It looks so sleek. Like, hypothetically, I don't know, they'd have to reach through the treads to get at them, maybe that's annoying, I don't know. But shit, it looks cool. It's clever and I like it. Like, I don't know. It might feel like I'm giving this thing too much credit. Like, yeah, it's a Power Miners thing that is really good. But I was just absolutely floored by this thing because it's more than that. This is like a feat of LEGO engineering, right? Like, this wasn't a set made with specific parts in mind. They couldn't just go, oh, I need this, let's add this to the set, oh, I need this can go in. No, it was just handed parts from two very specific sets and made something completely different, but still incredibly impressive with them. And I just absolutely adore that. Now, with all that said, do I have any issues with this model? Well, yeah, I guess I do. For a start, if you're looking to make it yourself, the cost of entry is pretty fucking high, because you need two sets, and one of them is pretty damn expensive. Also, while it's nowhere near as bad as the other two combination models, some aspects of it are a little bit flimsy. Sometimes this bucket here comes loose. These floodlights aren't exactly attached in the most stable manner. Personally, I think the biggest issue with this set is not what it does, but what it doesn't do. While they are much worse models on their own, the Cave Cutter and the Aero Shredder make use of most of the parts made available to them, but that's not exactly the case with the Crystal Crawler. There's quite a lot left over. I'd say it uses like just over 2/3 of the available pieces, and in a way I respect that because, you know, they're not trying to do more than they have to do, they're just making something really good and letting it be really good as is, but I don't know, it's a bit of a shame to have so much left over. However, because there's quite a lot left over, one nice thing that you can do is take what's left over and make something of your own out of the leftover parts. I actually did this myself. I built the Crystal Crawler on stream, and once we were finished, I took the leftover pieces and I made this sort of small outpost for the miners. The idea for this is that it would be sort of like a small base that the miners could set up somewhere, drill for crystals, just kind of take it easy, and use this claw on the side to maybe, I don't know, grab hazardous materials or whatever. It's just a small little thing, but I'm really fond of it, and it was a lot of fun to do because, again, I had to make the most out of the parts I had available to me. Obviously, leaving enough pieces left over to where I could make something else isn't really an upside to the Crystal Crawler, but still, it's something I had a lot of fun with nonetheless, and if you feel like making the Crystal Crawler for yourself, I would totally recommend doing something like this. So, there you have it. The Crystal Crawler is my absolute favourite combination model that LEGO has ever put out, and as a whole, if you couldn't gather, I absolutely fucking love combination models. I hope you don't mind that most of this video was just like combination model and power miners related rambling, and then we only really talked about the model at the very end, but I kind of feel like that was the best approach to take here. If we just talked about the Crystal Crawler, this wouldn't be a very long video, and I don't know, rambling about this shit is really fun, so I hope you found it fun too at least. Thanks for watching, have a good one.